Hi, I'm Tom Luna. I'm a former school board member. I was privileged to serve as senior advisor to U.S. Secretary of Education Rod Page. I also had the honor of serving for 8 years as Idaho State Superintendent of Public Instruction. During that time, I also served as president of the Council of Chief State School Officers. One thing I have learned in all these experiences is that educating children is not rocket science, it's more complicated. On my podcast, Swimming Upstream, we will visit with courageous leaders who challenge the prevailing tide and inspire all of us to swim against the current. Let's jump in. And we're back with another episode of Swimming Upstream. I'm Tom Luna, the host, and we've had the privilege of talking with state education leaders across the country. We're in season number 2, and today we're visiting with Katie Jenner. She is the Secretary of Education for the great state of Indiana. And Katie, thank you so much for joining us on Swimming Upstream.
Tom, thank you for having me, and it's great to finally meet you, even though we're on screen. Good to see you.
Yeah, we've had a lot of conversations, and we've been at the same places, but never had the opportunity to meet in person. And really appreciate. I'm very familiar with Indiana, having spent a lot of time there. When I was in office, your former state chief there, Tony Bennett, was and continues to be a fond and great friend of mine. And so when you think of the title and the name of this podcast, Swimming Upstream, we're talking about those folks that go against the current, and definitely when it comes to education, if we're going to make the change that's necessary, it requires that we push against the status quo and swim against the current. And you've done a lot of that. And we're going to talk about that, but I want to start by letting people learn a little bit more about you. Let's start this, talk about this, that most people don't know how their state education leader, whether they call them a secretary, a commissioner, or a superintendent, House elected, or they assume that it happens the same way in their state. But what we know is some are elected. That's how we do it in Idaho. Some are appointed. Indiana is a state that went from an elected state superintendent to now an appointed secretary, and you are the first Secretary of Education in the state of Indiana. So talk to us a little bit about that and what difference that is going from an elected state superintendent to now an appointed secretary.
Sure. So you're exactly right. It's interesting when you look at all of the states. I think they say about a third are elected, a third are appointed by a governor, and a third are appointed by a state board. So in Indiana, we were one of the electeds. And the history, as it's shared with me and with others, is we had Democrat and Republican governors working towards getting this to be a governor-appointed position, primarily because, as in most states, half of our state budget is education.
Yes.
And my goodness, you can get so much done when the governor and the education chief link arms and just get after it. So I am thrilled to serve Indiana. I love the work, and I'm really thankful for Governor Holcomb for giving me the opportunity.
So you're appointed by the governor, and you are a member of his cabinet, then senior cabinet.
I am. I'm appointed by Governor Holcomb, a member of his cabinet, as well as I serve as the chair of the State Board of Education. So that's
that's a big role.
That's even unique as well, I think.
Yeah.
And that's not required by statute that I serve as chair. I'm an elected chair, but it sure has helped. As again, our state board members are key allies as well to drive change, to swim upstream.
Yeah, there you go. You were appointed in 2020, so you're in your third year, beginning your fourth year, right? And
actually, I was appointed in November 2020 to start January 21.
Okay, all right.
So time flies when you're having fun. A lot of people think that I've been in longer, but I am just at about 2 years and 7 months.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, let's talk about some of the things you've been focusing on,
Sure.
and talk about how some of the things that you've done to make these ideas work in Indiana, and what folks can learn from. But one of the things that you've focused on is what I believe you refer to as GPS.
Yes.
Right. And talking about graduates and preparing to succeed, I believe is the acronym, but,
Right.
Or prepared to succeed. So talk to us about that. A lot of states are doing some things that are similar to Portrait of a Graduate.
Uh-huh.
And the idea that the purpose of schools, assuring that when a child graduates, that they're ready for the world that awaits them. It seems kind of a no-brainer, but quite actually, it's something that we haven't spent enough time focusing on.
That's
what
right.
the expectation should be and needs to be for K-12 education. So talk to us about how you focused on that.
Sure. So if you think about high school today and K-12 today, the normal, what we're doing right now, is in many respects not working. And if it's working for a few, it's not working for a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
So in Indiana, we really directionally said, number one, what are the indicators that really matter for a child, in addition to reading scores, in addition to understanding math? What are the indicators that make sure we truly blur the lines between K-12, higher ed, workforce? Our talent pipeline becomes a pull system, and that our K-12 system starts to shift to better support that. But in order to really understand what that could be, we started with building out a profile of a graduate. Our General Assembly gave us the task in 2021 to build out a school performance dashboard using a variety of indicators. And immediately I had a number of lobbyists calling saying, boy, do I have the assessment for you, or boy, do I have the way to measure this indicator, which is fine. But again, it charged us as a team to say, wait a second, before we throw a bunch of indicators on a dashboard, let's talk to Hoosiers. Let's talk to our people. Let's talk to the parents, the educators, the business people, the community leaders, and understand what matters for all Hoosiers, regardless of where you live, the color of your skin, how much money your parents make or don't make. And that's what led to what we call Indiana Graduates Prepared to Succeed, Indiana GPS, recognizing that the old get your diploma and walk across the stage should not be the end point.
Exactly.
Ever. It should be a part of the process.
Yeah.
So it's interesting in Indiana, the 5 characteristics that rose to the top, not surprisingly, academic mastery, reading and STEM. The second was career and post-secondary readiness, but really a focus on credentials of value to increase our educational attainment, as well as work-based learning experiences. The
Yes.
third area, it started to shift to skills. Our stakeholders said we need, and they've said this for a long time, but we need kids who can communicate and not just talk, but or not just TikTok, but actually communicate and talk.
There you go.
So we knew we needed that skill development on communication, collaboration. The fourth area, which was actually the most debated, was work ethic. Some people wanted to call it grit or perseverance, but work ethic is key. We as a country, as a society, aren't going to do it for you. You have to be a part of the solution. The fifth one is civics, financial, and digital literacy. So knowing those 5 characteristics, our profile of a graduate, we got to work and said, this is great to be out here, but the only way we move the needle is to know where we are today.
Yeah.
And be very transparent with our data.
Yeah.
So IndianaGPS.com shares every school in the state of Indiana, all school types. We're for all schools being quality schools. All of the data is out there for these measurement indicators. part of the interesting challenge, Tom, and you probably experienced this in Idaho, when it comes to K-12 data, the Department of Education has some, the Commission for Higher Ed has some. We wanted to look at longitudinal data points, including 5-10 years out, students' median wage and sustainable employment and other longitudinal. So Department of Workforce Development, but we had to pull all of these in. The final thing I'll mention, the General Assembly gave us a deadline of July 1, 2024. And as I remind our General Assembly leadership, of which we have a great relationship, we beat your deadline by a year and a half. But it is very, it's a work in progress. We're still improving it.
So let's talk about the work in process, because I love what you shared, and those 5 characteristics, absolutely critical. It's always been a struggle to figure out how to measure them. You mentioned that a bit. But one of the other challenges is you still have a school day that is so many hours broke up into so many semesters. If you have graduation requirements that require this many semesters of math, this many semesters of English, this many semesters of social studies or whatever, and people will try to take what you just described as a vision and a program and try to force it to fit back in that old system, whether it's a block system. So talk to us about Swimming Upstream, because that's the current you're swimming against. If that's what's really important, is those characteristics. And you mentioned literacy and you mentioned STEM, the academic side of it, that's part of it. But you got to do some things in high school that you're currently not doing, and which means you're probably going to have to do things you are doing differently.
So as you were talking, Tom, the first thing that popped in my mind is our General Assembly has been pretty aggressive on obviously providing parents choice, but also providing flexibility for our schools. Our challenge on the flexibility for schools is on the flexibility waivers that we've been receiving. We're not really shaking the tree, right? Yeah. We're not really disrupting. So when you look ahead or previewing the work of the state board that's coming, we recently did a landscape analysis of all the states in our country to learn from them on what do the diploma requirements look like. It was presented to the board, and what we saw is a lot of nibbling around the edges, right? Take computer science in lieu of this course, take financial literacy in lieu of this course. But we believe, and where the synergy is really building with our stakeholders, is it's going to have to be a very significant disruption if we really want to shift the paradigm with high school redesign as one example.
Yeah.
So you think about as one component, not only course flexibility, and you already heard me say the readiness piece, the college and career readiness piece. The second component for us in our graduation pathways today is work-based, project-based, service-based learning. So we're really leaning into the quality work-based learning space, working with our business and industry. How might we build out apprenticeships for these emerging industries? And how might we make sure the junior and senior year is really spent on that kind of work, the high quality work-based learning, the skill development evaluation happening in the business, not just the four walls of the classroom.
Yeah.
And then that third component that will really be peeling back is the credential of value. We always say credential of value because not all credentials matter. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
And
in the marketplace or the talents or skills that they represent, what is in demand?
What is in demand presently? What is the future demand? How can it be stackable for the child to have economic mobility? It's essential. So those are the three components that we're really going to be attacking ahead. Our leadership of both chambers and governor are aware that there are over 100 provisions right now in Indiana state law And one of our roles this coming legislative session will be to tell them what we need, what we don't need, what we need to modify in order to allow us to really disrupt the high school as we know it today.
Yeah, and I think, I think the process that you've taken, where you create the idea, if you will, the big idea, you go out and get a lot of input from all the stakeholders, parents, educators, the business community, like you described, and you design, or you come up with this is what is absolutely critical when it comes to education. And then, like you said, you go back and look at what's currently in law, what's currently in policy, what's currently even in tradition, and what has to change there in order for us to meet this objective that you've identified. And that can be the hard work. It takes time, but I think over time, you gain more and more confidence from the folks that are whether they're parents or business people or patrons. And one of the critical components of that is data, right? That you can show the progress that's being made. You mentioned that the data is out there. It just unfortunately resides in many different silos, and pulling that together. So that's a great, it sounds like something that is a model, right, of how you developed it. And then the next step is you've got to figure out how to implement it. And
right.
You're in the middle of that.
Well, and there's one other piece that you might be interested in, because you're right, it's building the model, but it's also how do you deploy it well? And when you think about increasing credentials of value, you think about the cost of dual enrollment courses potentially, think about work-based learning, you think about all the barriers that I'm sure people listening are thinking of, like, well, what about the kids who can't drive? What about transportation? What about this? What about that? One of the things our General Assembly set up and said to us, go forth and design it, is a CSA. It's akin to an ESA, but a CSA is a career scholarship account. It's the first in the nation.
Yeah, wow.
It's fascinating. And by the way, we're going to learn from it. It's not going to be perfect in the beginning. We're going to learn from it. We're going to improve it. We're going to expand it. But we'll be launching that for the first time ever this fall. And that allows up to $5,000 per year for 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th graders to get that work-based learning experience, to earn that credential of value. Now, the caveat in the short period is it's designed to scale. So first year, there's a limit on how many students so that we can do it well, learn from it. Second year, it's a little bit more. And then we'll go back in budget sessions, share what we've learned, share the data, and see where they land on the next. But the CSA is, so I described the totally rethinking our diploma requirement structure, but it's also really starting to think about our financial structure and how might it look.
Yeah, when you look at, funding formulas and accountability systems, that's what drives most of the decisions made at the local level, right? And those better be in line with your vision and ideas, because they'll trump your vision and ideas if they're not, right? That's what focuses. I want to shift gears here really quick, because one of the things that you've done is also recognize that for all of this to work, literacy is a foundational skill, and in the early grades, it's absolutely critical. So talk to us about the work happening in Indiana, and then also the direct connection. If you have kids in high school and you have all these amazing ideas, you need kids to enter high school ready to be able to take full advantage of all of those. And if academically they're not ready, whether it's literary skills or math skills, they're not ready, then you've built this amazing opportunity, but they're not going to be able to take advantage of it. So talk to us about what you've done with literacy in Indiana.
Well, and the old adage, first you learn to read, then you read to learn.
Yeah.
It's exactly is playing out in Indiana and across our country. Coming in to this role, we immediately pulled not only the data post-COVID, but we pulled the longitudinal data. And what we found in Indiana is that for about a decade, Tom, we've been in a decline in our reading, foundational reading at the end of third grade. A lot of people just attribute learning issues right now to COVID, and that is false. We had learning issues much before. It just exacerbated it.
Yeah.
So in Indiana today, and this is pretty startling and not something we're necessarily proud of, but I'll say it. In Indiana today, we have 1 in 5 third graders who are not able to read. I think in many
at grade level? Yeah, at grade level. Or
they're not able to pass a foundational, we call it iRead 3. You may remember when that was created. They're not able to pass that. Yeah. 81.6%. Now our new data will come out in a couple of weeks, but 2022 data was 81.6% were passing. The highest we've been was back in 2012, 2013 school year at 91.4%. We've been in a decline. Yeah. We've seen that somewhat with our NAEP scores as well. So the urgency is real. The crisis is real. So we are fortunate enough to have the Lilly Endowment right here in Indiana. Great relationship with them. We announced in August the largest literacy investment in the history of our state, up to $111 million, to focus not only on our current teachers to make sure they understand the science of reading practices and strategies, unlearn the 3 Qing and some of the other stuff, right?
Yes.
But then up to $25 million is on our ed prep programs as well. We are really, really leaning in to call out what is working and what is not working in our ed prep colleges. So then I'll also add our General Assembly this past session. I mean, gosh, they came through with even more. They gave us about $60 million to further, scale this work in different ways. So we have several different tactics moving to drive this much needed change.
Katie, one thing, let's cover this quickly, and then we'll wrap this up. I want to be respectful of your time, but one theme I hear through all of this is there seems to be a strong working relationship between the governor's office, your position, and the legislature. That's not common. There are other states that have that privilege, if you will. That's not easy to maintain. There's a lot of people that have a lot. Egos are always part of this, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? But people have their own agendas. Everybody went to school, so they have their own ideas of what it should look like. But you're in a unique position there in Indiana when you have, I'm assuming, the state board also as part of that working cooperatively together.
Yes.
Talk a bit about that and the benefits of that.
So it's interesting, Tom, when we came in and when the governor asked me to join the team and be the secretary in November of 2020, that was one of our first conversations. He said, Katie, and these are my words, but he said it better than I'm about to say it. But essentially, Katie, over the past many years in education in Indiana, the headlines have been State Board of Ed is battling Department of Education. Department of Education is battling the Senate or the House or the governor, but everyone's battling. When that happens, then we're not talking about the science of reading and high school redesign and all the other really important education topics that are urgent to be discussing. So he said, I want you to build Indiana's education focus, the strategies, the pillars, and drive it forward. So he really charged our team to build bridges that had been burned down to the ground.
Yeah.
And we spend still today many, many hours a week talking to stakeholders, hearing from Hoosiers, all sorts of Hoosiers, and spend many, many hours talking to our decision makers, our legislators. What are you hearing? What challenges can we help solve? In fact, right before this interview, I had a legislator in my office.
Yeah.
I mean, it's this morning I had two. But we started to pull them to the table strategically to help us solve, so that they can see some of the tough battles that we have, but also so that they can see the transparent data.
Yeah. Perfect.
It's been a real, I'm very, very grateful for our governor and the leadership of both chambers. They have been, I'm knocking on wood now.
Yeah.
They have been fantastic to work with.
Well, the students will benefit from this, because we've seen examples, your state not too many years ago, but then others even today, where you just don't have that cooperation. One thing I've noticed, I had the privilege of having a governor that was very supportive, and we worked closely together for the 8 years I was in office. And I see what happens when you have a governor and an education leader that aren't on the same page, or if you have a governor that education just isn't a priority. I don't care if you're an elected state superintendent or appointed. A state superintendent is not going to get this all done. That you have to have a governor that's willing to be part of the leadership, and Indiana benefits from that. So,
absolutely.
Just really appreciate that leadership and that example in that area. The work that you're doing on career readiness and Indiana graduate.
Prepared to succeed.
Go GPS.
IndianaGPS.com. It's a work in progress, but go check it out.
We'll do that. And then thank you for being on the show and on the podcast on Swimming Upstream. And one thing we do to always close our podcasts is we ask, what is one piece of trivia or something that's unique about Indiana that most people don't know?
So, Tom, I always keep it real, no matter who I'm talking to. So I'm talking to you and any of the listeners. I totally was looking at my comms director like, what? What? I can talk education all day, but in terms of the quick trivia, you never want me on your team there. We have in Indiana, there are 3 presidents and 6 vice presidents who have roots in the Hoosier state. Yeah,
that's I would not know that. That works. Yeah.
So, and
tell your comms director, well done. That's a good one.
And this was asked today. Indiana state pie is the sugar cream pie. We do it better than any other state, and the tenderloin sandwich. So everybody should come to Indiana to get those 2 things and anything else they might want. But those are a couple of
fantastic. So we learned obviously some history that I wasn't aware of. Wasn't Dan Quayle from Indiana? That's the only one I could think of. And of course, Abraham Lincoln has some ties to Indiana.
Harrison,
right? Okay.
President Harrison. No, don't quiz me, Tom.
Yeah. I'm going to stop right there too. I've exhausted my history off the top of my head, but those are great, and we appreciate you sharing those with us. And Secretary of Education Katie Jenner from the great state of Indiana, thank you for being our guest on Swimming Upstream, and I look forward to connecting with you soon.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you for listening, and remember, our children may only be 22% of our population, but they represent 100% of our future. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to our YouTube channel and find us on your favorite podcast platform. Swimming Upstream is part of the Strategos Podcast Network. To view the entire lineup of our shows, visit our website, strategosgroup.com.